UD's platform Quon carved out a new niche for Japanese trucks when it showed up here in New Zealand early 2018. UD said Quon retained the traditional attributes of trucks from the land of the rising sun and combined them with safety and productivity systems, once the preserve of Europe's big names. 4 years on, we check out, has Quon blazed a trail or burnt some bridges? For the average person, lifting stuff up high, especially heavy stuff, and putting it down again somewhere else is always a bit nerve-wracking. Mixing Newton's laws with lifting contraptions made of steel, tubes of pressurised oil, valves, ropes and hooks requires intelligence, education, calmness and, let's face it, nerve. McLeod Cranes and Hiabs in Mount Maunganui has its roots in a company founded by local crane guru, the late Curly McLeod. And for the past decade and a half, it has been owned and run by Curly's sons, Peter and Scott, and their cousin Phil Hutchinson, and has grown immeasurably in their tenure. Interestingly, the growth hasn't come from anything as tacky as rate cutting, but rather an unwavering adherence to culture founded on intelligence, education and calmness, delivered via practical and respectful systems and processes. Aiming for a culture such as McLeod's is common, however, delivering it is not. Too often, the intent is ankle-tapped by a perception on the ground of disrespect for grandfather IP, experience and general life skills. Not so here. An initial look at who's pulling the levers of the McLeod operation starts to give its secrets away. All three owners bring to the firm a vast practical, yet systems-driven background. Scott is ex-Navy, qualified in systems and electronics. Peter is a structural engineer who has worked around the world managing the lifts on what you might call mega crane operations, primarily in the oil and gas exploration industry. And Phil is Mr. Transport, having spent his life before joining the family business in two of the nation's culture congregations, Mainfreight and TR Group. Interestingly, the phrase on the rear of their plant equipment, "good bastards," is a tip of the hat to Curly, reminding one and all that relationships are paramount at all levels, and modern processes and culture are not at odds with traditional values. With more than 200 pieces of equipment across 4 divisions and 5 depots spread around the Bay of Plenty and Central North Island, McLeod's is a significant and complex operation. It can furnish its customers with everything from an Iveco daily with a crane that looks like a hydraulic toothpick to a behemoth with a 74-tonne tier capable of lifting 350 tonnes, requiring an entourage of roadies to cart its counterweights, extra jibs, as well as a variety of hooks and rigging. "It's an interesting business, there's no doubt about that," said Phil Hutchinson. "Not just the work either, there's occupational cultural crossover. Crane people are not truck people and vice versa. They're completely different breeds. Crane people are used to one job potentially taking days by the time you include setting up and breaking down the gear. In that, there will be spurts of intense activity and concentration. There may be periods of not too much. The truckies, on the other hand, they like to keep on moving. Next job, next job, next job. It's a cool place to work." On arrival at the Fleet Park Up Yard, we got the first look at the reason why we were here. The company's new UD Quon CG32-460 before rigid and Palfinger knuckle boom crane resplendent in the fleet colours. The level of detail alone spoke volumes. It's one of a pair of new UDs to have driven in the gate recently, the first 2 of 8 that are on their way. The reason McLeod's has written the order number for the UD would surely warm the hearts of not just UD New Zealand, but also the high officers within UD's strategic think tank. We've traditionally bought Hino product with a Fuso in the mix too, but UD's latest platform Quon with the safety and productivity systems was perfectly aligned to us, says Phil. We met with the driver Brett Mayer at McLeod's Truman Lane headquarters in Mount Maunganui right on dawn. Brett was standing in for the regular driver of the UD, Ryan Ward, who was away on annual leave. Brett's been with the company for almost 6 years and is currently transitioning into a training role for the company. Brett carried out the pre-start check on the app-based system called Pre-Start. "Ryan's a bloody good operator," said Brett. "Absolute top bloke, and I can tell you right now there'll be nothing out of place on this truck." While he started checking off his list, we went for a stroll around the unit, and the first thing that was blatantly obvious was it was like the Lilburn Kenworth in the December-January issue. This completed machine was designed by crane people, with a high emphasis on procedure. The more you walked around it, the more you saw. There was no shortage of kit to do the job as simply as possible, and it was all placed within easy reach. When speccing the new UDs, the company chose the biggest spec for the Quon, with the GH11 TD 11-litre Euro 6 motor outputting 338 kilowatts, 460 horsepower at 1800 RPM, and 2,200 newton metres, 1623 pound-foot of torque at 1200 RPM. What really allows the GH11 to punch above its weight is that Escott 6 12-speed AMT, And being a Volvo platform truck, we all know that DNA. And its beautifully smooth characteristics, slick shifts and on-point tuning set the whole driveline up for success. And looking out back is UD's 20-tonne high-powered rear end on proprietary 8-bag ECAS, and forward is UD's 13-tonne reverse Elliott I-beam front axle set up on parabolic leaf springs. And when we talk to Phil about the spec, he's quick to mention the UDs are already proving their worth on runs to places like the Coromandel, with significantly better trip times on account of the torquiness of the GH11 engine mated up to the Escort AMT. And focusing on the workstation and surrounds for a moment, there's the usual form factor of a 2-gauge binacle, split by the vehicle and driver diagnostics. On the right of the binacle are a pair of switch banks housing traction aids in one cluster and hill hold and idle controls on the other. To the left there's an integrated wrap in perfect design unity with the binacle, with communication, infotainment, climate and a couple more switch clusters. And in the McLeod's machine you'll find extra controls due to the elaborate Palfinger crane hanging on the rear and all that goes with that. There's no question that UD lifted the standards on fit and finish in a Japanese truck with the arrival of the new Quon. McLeod's is just the customer that the boffins at UD must have been thinking about when they raised the bar on what defines a truck from Japan. At the end of the day, everything is about application, whether it be trucks to a task or your principles in business. Process is something really understood, and although it's permeated in every square inch of commerce, health and safety is still something many struggle to do well. Our approach has been key to us winning a number of blue chip contracts in recent years. We place a huge emphasis on staff development and training, with 3 full-time trainers in the business and a 4th coming on board shortly. We're also great believers in bringing in new blood into the industry and run a number of cadets, said Phil. For us, spending 2 days with the McLeod's team, we could see how it's tragic that Curly missed the growth of the business and seeing what we see today. The hours he devoted to the business's formative years set an example in terms of work ethic and service to his sons and nephew. As polished as the McLeod operation is today, that legacy is one that Scott, Pete and Phil and the rest of the wider family and staff strive to hold true. After all, it's encompassed in the catchphrase that is sign written onto every machine: good bastards. We are 100% sure when every McLeod's crane points skyward, Curly's looking down duly proud of the Mount's homegrown crane business and what it is that they all still stand for today. To catch the full story on these new heavy lifting Quons for McLeod's Cranes and Hiabs of Mount Maunganui, then grab a copy of the March 22 New Zealand Trucking magazine. Take care out there and travel safe.